Greetings, everybody. Happy afternoon. My name is Dr. Nina Ha. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of the APITA Plus Center. This is our first full week of APITA Heritage Month. So welcome to APITA Heritage Month. We actually have learning lunches pretty much monthly. And learning lunches are basically an informal time in which this, VT community gets to meet PETA faculty who just want to, who were asked to just share their personal and professional journeys into higher education. And so today we have Dr. Kyle Dalit, right? And he will be sharing his story.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for coming and hope you're enjoying the food. Yeah, just have some slides to give you an idea of where I come from and my journey. So I was born and raised in Hawaii. I'm part Native Hawaiian. And I'm currently a postdoc in mathematics here at Virginia Tech. I work on applied mathematics and applications to biology.
Sorry,
No worries.
they're showing a different slide, so just trying to see.
Okay.
Yeah, this one, right? Okay.
Yeah. So
Is this
that's the island I'm from. If you click on that link, I went on Google Maps instead. On the bottom right is a link.
my home?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that just happened.
I was just gonna go to Google Maps. So that's the main Hawaiian Islands, and if you zoom out, just to give you a sense of like where it is in relation to the rest of the world and Virginia Tech, if you just zoom out on Google Maps. Sorry, I was gonna do it. I was trying to make a video, but you need to like
whoops, I think I lost it.
Yeah, so well that's a sense I wanted to give you of how isolated the Hawaiian Islands are. Is like once you're zoomed out on the Pacific Ocean, unless you know where you're looking, you're not gonna find them because they're so it's like Honolulu is the most isolated populated city on the planet from other ones. It's about 4,500 miles away from here. Yeah, you can go back to the slide.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hold on. Let me just make sure.
But you guys can like ask questions at any point or anything. It'll be super informal.
Can people see?
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Oh,
make
no,
you
you're
check back
fine.
and forth.
Oh, no, you're totally, I'm just technologically incompetent.
You can click forward. So that's the island I'm from. It's called Oahu. It's the capital island. Honolulu's there. Waikiki, which is like a tourist area you might have heard of, is there. And then, so I did my bachelor's in mathematics at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And there I had like a cool research experience doing population modeling of corals, trying to understand how coral populations like grow or shrink over time, which was especially relevant considering climate change and coral bleaching. And one summer I spent
my journey.
or anyone on the side now. No, it's just like websites.
Oh.
One summer I went to Arizona State University for an RU research experiences for undergraduates. It's like an NSF funded program at many different universities across the country. And I worked on more kind of mathematical modeling, this time on invasive species. So trying to understand how this particular invasive plant called Sahara mustard was invading the landscape there and its effects on native wildlife or plant life. Oh, yeah, you can click again. And then I went to graduate school. I got my master's and PhD in mathematics from Purdue University. So there I began focusing on modeling epidemics, infectious diseases, with a particular focus on mosquito-borne diseases. And my kind of niche is I look at how those diseases spread in wildlife populations or from wildlife populations to human ones. So you'll see a slide later, but we're all familiar with emerging infectious diseases like COVID. You might have heard of Zika or dengue. So a lot of these emerging diseases in the past couple of decades have come from wildlife and are spread by mosquitoes. And if you click again, I did a postdoc at the University of Georgia, kind of in a similar topic. And then now I'm here at Virginia Tech. And then next I just got accepted a position at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo as an assistant professor. So I'll be starting there in the fall. Thank you. That's a brief highlight of my journey. So I started in Hawaii and just kept moving east, even though I've been trying to move home. I finally got a position that's closer, still an ocean away. Okay, so my research kind of is in math, but I focus on applications. So one kind of big area is in ecology. So if you click, just give you an idea of different projects I work on. I know it's probably too small to read. But so I focus on like invasive species dynamics. I focused on some like coral, like I told you about before, and the coral populations, how they change. Recently, I've been looking at the coral microbiome and how bacteria and viruses in that microbiome interact. It's really cool. You click again. And then also focus a lot on epidemiology and the intersection between these two areas. So my during my PhD, I wrote a paper on how avian malaria, which is a type of malaria, mosquito-borne disease that affects birds, impacts some native Hawaiian forest birds, and possible interventions we can do to conserve them. I focused a lot on temperature and mosquito-borne diseases. So mosquitoes are insects, they're cold-blooded, and their biology is really determined by the temperature around them. And so with global climate change, it's expected that the areas that suffer the most from mosquito-borne diseases are going to shift. And areas that don't have any mosquito-borne diseases right now may have to deal with them in the future. So some work looking at mathematical models to understand that better. And then all the people in my research area did a little bit of SARS-CoV-2 modeling, so I did some of that, and that wasn't fun. And then some more general kind of topics on like how to control diseases that spread between multiple locations. And then if you click again, and then I've done a lot of work with Indigenous scholarship in STEM. So mostly supporting Indigenous students in STEM. So one thing I've been doing for the past few summers is workshops and seminars at the University of Hawaii, Manoa and West Oahu on place-based math education, which is like a form of pedagogy that's you aim to be more culturally relevant for the students. It works better in a place where you have like a native population to work with, but generally it gets students more engaged in what they're learning. And then done a lot of mentoring with Indigenous students, and I've looked a little bit at traditional ecological knowledge and how that's used in ecological research. So happy to talk about those things as well. So that's kind of an overview of different projects I've worked on over the past 5 or 6 years. Yeah, I don't remember what the next slide is. Okay, so I could go into more detail about my research, but maybe we can like chat for a while. You have any questions or any like particular things that I talked about that you're interested in? And focus in on that.
Online too.
Okay, yeah. Otherwise, it's gonna be pretty dry.
I was actually a little curious about, you had talked about how a lot of places that have been dealing with mosquito-borne diseases with the shift of climate
Mhm.
may have those insects move. What areas were they going to move to that you have discovered? Because I remember like kind of covering it, but like
Mhm.
not really like getting deep into it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so some places are too cold for too long for mosquitoes to live there. And so as those places warm up, they'll be able to survive through winters. And so, we used to have malaria here in Virginia and throughout the United States, and those mosquitoes were eliminated using, oh shoot, I remember the name of the agent now, DDT. And so that was very effective at, we don't suffer from malaria anymore, but unfortunately had very drastic environmental side effects. But all that is to say, if those mosquitoes become reestablished here, we could have malaria become reestablished here, along with a number of other mosquito-borne infectious diseases. And you might have dengue spreads in Puerto Rico, and you can find it in southern Florida, but as things warm up, it could spread further north in this country. On the other hand, you have places that are going to become too hot for the mosquitoes to survive as well. And so it's a subtle thing that requires a lot of work. It's not just going to be across the board. Everything's going to there's gonna be a lot more disease. It'll depend on the specific climate.
So is it mostly just on the East Coast then, or is it also being seen in like just across the entire US, like just moving up?
Yeah, I mean, the most likely places for it to come in are gonna be at southern ports, right? But you can have people who may be sick, infected with dengue or something, and they fly into Miami airport and get bit by a mosquito there that can itself get infected, and then you have to worry about that local transmission. And then you can get, transmission chains all the way up as wherever those mosquitoes are found. Most major cities have really good mosquito control programs, but rural areas don't, so that's a concern. And then it's not just the US, right? So South America as well, you have, especially where there's big elevation changes, that controls the temperature, right? So as it gets warmer, the mosquitoes can move further and further up mountains.
I did have a question. So you're a math person, but it seems like you also need to be a public health person. How do you sort of source out like
Yeah.
your information, and do you have to work closely with collaborators?
Yeah, the most important skill is learning how to communicate with people in different
Yeah,
disciplines.
yeah,
And like, I mean, especially coming from math, humility is a big part of it, because like when you're trained in math, that's like the only thing you're seeing in your classrooms. And so learning how to like frame that as your tool set and not your worldview, I guess, is important, because some people will just think that you coming from math, that's all you think about or care about, and I just use it as a tool mostly.
that's helpful.
Mhm.
I guess because, you never know what the interdisciplinary work.
Yeah. And then public health is a whole other beast. I don't really work with like human public health so much.
Okay.
And that, working with people is a challenge. So I mostly focus on ecology.
Okay.
So I did my postdoc at the University of Georgia was in the ecology department there. I thought I was gonna try my hand at switching disciplines, and there are big cultural differences between departments, and so I found that I prefer the math department culture than ecology.
Do you have another slide or?
Yeah, so I just have some slides like, oh yeah, if you go to that previous one, you can see
Sorry. This one.
all the colored areas are areas where malaria used to be prevalent. And all the purple areas are where it's still prevalent, as of 2002. So it's actually shrunk, since then. But in areas where it's still around, it's gotten worse over the past, 6 years since COVID ended. And especially now that USAID has been defunded. So that was a, US funded program that did like the lion's share of funding of malaria prevention, in sub-Saharan Africa. And so, yeah, so that's just malaria. If you click forward, oh yeah, the next slide shows the goal was that bottom graph to decrease malaria incidence to that level by 2050, and where we're at is far above that, and the trajectory is not looking great.
Cool.
right.
Sorry.
And it's very preventable. Like we just need to spend the money. It's not like it is adapting and evolving, but it's not like cancer, right? We don't need to figure out what to do. We just need to do it. So that's what's especially frustrating about being.
Next.
And this is what I mentioned earlier, like these emerging diseases that, thankfully we haven't really heard about any new ones recently. But over a quarter of them come from mosquitoes. So there's these diseases that transmit in some wildlife population that we probably don't know about. And then it adapts and a mosquito bites one of us, and then we get sick and it adapts and it can spread between us. So, dengue, Zika, chikungunya are the most well-known of those. Yeah.
Next.
You don't have to click a lot. I have a bunch of animations, but you can just keep clicking.
Thank you.
So, just to reiterate, like unlike COVID, where we could spread it to each other in this room, mosquito-borne diseases require two different populations, right? Two different species even, to spread. You just keep clicking.
Okay.
It's kind of like show this. So like an infected mosquito bites some cow. I don't know, I chose cows because they're fun. That cow gets bit by an uninfected mosquito, that mosquito becomes infected. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I don't make Dramatic automation.
Oh.
Yeah, and so the way this is modeled usually is with these, what are called compartmental models. So we've got like a mosquito population and say a human or cow population, whatever you want to use. So when that infected mosquito bites a susceptible human, they become infected. That infected person gets bitten by a susceptible mosquito. That mosquito gets exposed, that parasite or pathogen develop it for a little while, and then that mosquito becomes infectious itself. And so we have a system of ordinary differential equations that corresponds to these compartments, and that's we solve those usually numerically because you can't solve them directly, and we make simulations and analyze those. Yeah. Oh, yeah, and so my focus here while at Virginia Tech has been on adding like additional biological realism and accuracy to the existing model. So what I showed you before is like a model that dates back to the like early 20th century, like literally the 1900s. And so we've come a long way since then, and I've been focusing on how the behaviors of ourselves or other animals affect our risk of getting infected, as well as the behaviors of mosquitoes and how that they interact with us, and then just general ecological traits. And so, that sounds like not very much mathematics, but the thing is when you add in additional layers of complexity, the math gets more and more complicated. And so figuring out ways to distill that math down in a way that non-mathematicians can understand the general results. Right, so I have some animations. So ways that mosquito biting is affected by behaviors you can go through. So like, a cow uses its tail to scare off biting flies. Like, yeah. Or it might like not even get bitten by the mosquito, or it might form like a barrier, because it's like really moving around. And so obviously we ourselves know like when we sense flies or mosquitoes, we naturally will swat them away, right? And so this impacts our risk of getting bitten, right? Obviously, if we just sat there and didn't do anything, the mosquito would be able to bite us. That mosquito's infected, then we're gonna get sick, right? Whereas if we're like somehow it's like a super mosquito finder, we could keep from getting bitten. And these different behaviors affect the frequency at which things get bitten, as you might expect. And so in the orange, I have like a robin. You guys see robins around here. They don't really care about getting bitten by mosquitoes. They just deal with it. And so what this graph is showing is that when you put mosquitoes in a cage with robins and you measure how much blood they take in, they take very big meals, represented by that big bar on the right. Whereas starlings, which you also see around here, they're little shiny birds. They're much more active. They don't like getting bitten by mosquitoes. And so when you put them in a cage, and you measure how much blood the mosquitoes take, it's much smaller amount. So that big green bar on the left. And so this should affect the transmission of diseases differently to these two different animals, but we don't have good models to be able to understand that. And so that affects these contact rates, which are these kind of yellow lines connecting the two populations. So this is kind of a general question that I've been thinking about is how do these defensive behaviors like swatting or yellow tails or pecking if you're a bird, how do they alter or increase disease spread?
Don't have an answer yet, or
It depends, right? Any scientific question, the answer is it depends.
true.
So you can click through this a little bit. So the general mosquito life cycle. So why do they bite? So only females mosquitoes bite, suck, drink blood. The reason they do that is to get protein and lipids to be able to lay eggs. Male mosquitoes don't bite, and female mosquitoes don't actually. Some of them can get like nutrition from blood meals, but most of them rely on nectar, like the males do. So every time they are ready to lay eggs, they need to take a blood. And after they do that, they rest, drink some nectar, and then they go back to biting. So if you, this cycle here is called the egg laying cycle, or gonotrophic cycle, which is like the jargon term. Yeah. So I have a model of this. Just again, these compartments, like I described earlier, correspond to a system of ordinary differential equations, which I put on here if I wanted to intimidate you, but it literally just corresponds to this box and arrow diagram, which makes this a really good framework for working with non-mathematicians, because you just need to be able to, you draw these boxes and describe transitions, and it makes it easy for them to tell you when you're wrong. And so one critical assumption is that this transition going from biting to egg laying, this rate or duration of time they spend biting is just constant. You just take some average rate and it's constant. And, on top of that, that includes the assumption that they only bite one time per cycle. Which, if you swatted a mosquito away that was biting you, clearly it's going to take another bite in order to lay eggs. And so the goal has been to make that more general, to be able to more realistically represent this process. I don't know, I have a video I like to show people of mosquito biting, just because it's kind of fun. So if you click,
Do I click on the
there
video?
should be a play button near the bottom. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So this is that's a mosquito proboscis. There's a restrained and anesthetized mouse that it's feeding on. And it's looking for a blood vessel. You can see when it starts drinking blood, the vessel contracts. Yeah. So I show this video because we call it a mosquito bite because we think of it as like an instantaneous process. But it does take quite a bit of time. And so that assumption of, one bite that takes an instantaneous amount of time is very unrealistic. And this video goes on for almost a minute and a half. And this is in an ideal setting, right? For the mosquito, the mouse is not moving. It's tied down and it's sleeping, it's anesthetized, and it still takes this long to feed. And so you can imagine if you're moving around, making it harder for the mosquito to do what it wants to do, it could take much longer than that.
Want me to stop
You
it?
can skip it. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that constant assumption that I told you about before, where it's that rate going from biting to egg laying, corresponds to this black curve, which you can kind of see. So this is a probability distribution. How long does it take for the mosquito to finish feeding? And if you use that assumption, you get this black curve, which doesn't really line up with what limited data we have on this sort of thing. So if you click, you see that big gap there between the kind of modeling assumption and then the data there doesn't really match up at that lower end of the distribution. So you might use a more complicated distribution than what the black one is, an exponential one. So you could use what's called an Erlang distribution. So you guys have taken probability. It's a sum of two independent exponential distributions. It looks a little bit better. If you click again, you might have a different, now I'm taking a sum of 5 exponential distributions. Maybe that looks a little bit better, but how do you decide which distribution to use, right? And so this comes out, this is a statistical question at this point, less mathematics, more statistics. But the mathematics isn't there in the model to be able to allow for different distributions besides the exponential one. And so that's what the focus of this work was generalizing the model so you can use whatever distribution you think fits best to this process and plug it into the model. And so this is a paper I wrote along with Lauren Childs and Michael Robert here in the math department. And so we built this modeling framework so that instead of using this, very simple assumption that everyone uses, you can generalize it, use whatever distribution you want. And we go into way too much detail because it's written so that the mathematics is all there, but it's actually written for a non-math audience to be able to kind of build a recipe. I'm not sure. The next slide might be, yeah, so the recipe, it's a bunch of different quantities that you decide on or measure as a non-mathematician. It's either empirical or based on your understanding of the system. You plug that into our model and it spits out, you can get trajectories. You can plot how things change over time, like number of infected mosquitoes, etc. But it also gives you this quantity that's called the basic reproduction number, or R0 or R0. You may have heard about this during COVID. So it's this number that summarizes an outbreak. So if it's bigger than 1, you're going to get an outbreak. The disease will go up. But if it's less than 1, the disease will go down over time in the population. And so this is useful to predict whether or not, the introduction of the disease will cause an outbreak, It's useful when you're trying to suppress an outbreak or reduce the number of infections in a population. So there's different quantities that plug into that are part of this R naught, and if you change them, you can see how it changes R naught, whether it makes it smaller or bigger, and that'll give you a sense of your impact on the overall outbreak. And so what we kind of show is in a case study in this paper is that if you use different assumptions for how mosquito biting works, besides that really basic one, you get different predictions for how R naught changes when you kind of perturb the system. Yeah, so that's kind of the work I've done here at Virginia Tech. Is that very general thing. I threw in some like ongoing and future projects because they're maybe more interesting. But maybe we can pause if you guys have any questions about that. These will be less technical.
So I'm doing chemical engineering, and one issue that I have is there is a big gap between the models and the real life. So how do you fill the gaps between the model and the experience?
You find a collaborator who's on the other side of where you're trying to get, and you work together to bridge that gap. Yeah. And finding a partner is the hardest part, I think, to work with on that area. So we're lucky in this field of like epidemia and ecology that there's a 100-year tradition at this point of collaboration between mathematicians and public health folks and epidemiologists. Yeah, and so you need to find there's chemistry and math have gone together for longer than that. So there are probably mathematicians who do applications in your area that you might seek out. I know there's lots of questions in like crystallography that are relevant to chemistry that are really, really difficult, and so math people work on those, but I don't know if that's quite your area.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask how you got into this field of work.
Well, as a undergrad, I started as a physics major, so I really liked. I was strong at math in high school, and I was kind of interested in it in math for its own sake. But I like the idea that you could use it to understand the world. I remember one formative thing was in physics class, we learned, the equations of motion, like parabolas and how they, right? And so we launched a rocket and we, we measured all these different things that go into that equation. And then we sent someone out into a field, the exact distance we predicted the rocket was going to go, it was just a small rocket. And the person we sent out almost got hit in the head because that's how accurate we were able to get it. And I was just like, this is amazing. You can predict this as a student. I found the culture of physics to not be to my liking. It was a lot less collaborative than I would have liked. And I like to work with other people rather than on my own. And whereas when I went and worked with the math people, like if I went to another major and was like, I don't understand this topic, instead of them pointing to a book or suggesting I do something on my own, they grabbed the chalk and they went to the chalkboard and started explaining things. So I really like that kind of that culture. Like I mentioned earlier, I did a research project as an undergraduate, and so it was this program, an NSF-funded program that was pair and math major and a biology major on a project, an existing project. And as the math major, I was responsible for ensuring that the biology major understood all the math in the project, and he was responsible to ensure that I knew all the biology for the project. So I really enjoyed that. So it gave me an opportunity to teach this other person and learn from them and figure out how to get through these communication barriers. And yeah, that really got me going into it. And then I did an REU at Arizona State University, which was like group-based projects. There are maybe 8 groups, and we all did a different project and learned some skills along the way. I met my PhD advisor there, and that was how I really got into the field.
Anyone else? Christina, you're like you're thinking.
I was just wondering, since you collaborate with a lot of your ecological, you Great, sorry. You focus a lot on the public health side of things as well. I was wondering if papers are the main source of communication,
Mm.
which you kind of send out all the info you find, or are there other forms of communication that you use to kind of get this information out to the general public?
So me personally, my work is pretty theoretical. And so my work is trying to communicate maybe like two layers away from the public. Yeah, there are folks who, especially during COVID, you might have seen dashboards online, and so public communication, public science communication became a real focus of folks who were previously just writing papers. But like that paper I was talking about before, right? That's not even based on a single system. It's very general. It's meant to be applied to many different ones. So, I mean, right now, I'm trying to find partners to apply that framework to have an impact at, a real level. But mostly like the most fruitful connection I have right now is with an experimentalist here at Virginia Tech, where we're going to do some experiments in the lab to try and measure some parameters that go into that model. But again, that's, he himself is 2 layers removed from the public, right? And so it is important to frame our work in a way that, gives a realistic sense of the impact that it could have. But as you get closer and closer to the public, it becomes, you have to be a lot more nuanced and careful with your work.
Thank you.
So maybe we can zoom through these a
Yep.
little bit.
Yeah.
So I showed you this before, jump through it. Another thing is that when you swat at mosquitoes, right, you can kill them. And that should have a big impact on transmission, because if you kill a mosquito, it can't transmit anymore, it can't get infected. And so what this graph is showing is that what they did was locked some mosquitoes in a cage with a mouse that's in the maroon, a hamster in blue, and a chick, and like a baby chicken that's in the green. And in the mouse and the chicken's cage, almost 90% of the mosquitoes got killed over the time period, whereas none of the mosquitoes were killed in the hamster cage, right? And so you would expect that in the wild, maybe the hamster population is a better reservoir for disease than the chicken or the mouse, because they're not killing the mosquitoes are having a good time. But this isn't something that's taken into account in models. So if we want to understand which animals are the ones that are carrying mosquito disease, they're the ones that are like reservoirs for the disease. We should understand their behaviors and how those behaviors affect disease spread. So these are big questions. Can these behaviors increase transmission, like I mentioned earlier, by interrupting feeding? So like mosquito, say I have dengue, mosquito bites me and I swat it away. That mosquito has dengue, and then it goes and bites Dr. Ha. Now Dr. Ha's got dengue, right? Versus if I just let that mosquito bite me as long as it wanted to, and it goes and lays eggs, and then maybe it dies, right? But even if it goes and lays eggs and rests, there's going to be at least, let's say, 8 days between when it bit me and when it can infect someone else, versus 1 day or a few hours. And so you might expect that it increases transmission, but if they kill the mosquito, you might expect that it decreases transmission. So understanding these trade-offs, something I'd like to do in this future project. So,
Sorry, did you want me to?
yeah.
Okay.
So Dr. Clement Vidonger, he's a biochemistry professor here, and he's got this, he's really like a mosquito neuroscientist. But he's got this awesome laboratory setup where he can scare mosquitoes, which sounds easy to do, but he's done really cool work on it. And this is involved with the pandemic prediction and prevention destination area here at VT. It's like a big kind of research area across campus. And so we're trying to set up experiments to understand how mosquitoes react to different stimuli when they're specifically when they're blood feeding. And so we're measuring these probabilities of them getting scared off, as well as the amounts of time they spend doing different behaviors. So we have some undergraduate researchers who are measuring these things, and hopefully we can train a machine learning model to look at videos and do it themselves. Itself. So yeah, the goal is to take this data science perspective involving statistics and then this modeling perspective and bringing it together. So synthesize it. So I'm hoping to, my next position, bring on students and have them do these projects. Yeah, I'm like applying for grants that maybe will exist in here.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Right. Sorry, I stole this from my job talk, so there's some things that are like me saying like, I'm gonna get all this money and bring it to the campus. So another project that I wanna work on is going back to working on these native Hawaiian forest birds and avian malaria. Yeah. And so some background, there were approximately 142 native bird species before humans arrived. Of those, 95 are extinct. 10 of them are presumed to be extinct, and 33 of the remainder are endangered or threatened. And this pretty red bird on the right was recently listed as endangered, and it's due to avian malaria. So one of these birds gets infected with avian malaria, there's essentially a 95% probability it'll die from the disease. But recently, up until 2 weeks ago or so, we were using this intervention technique based on this bacteria called Wolbachia. And so this bacteria is carried by something like 95% of all insects. It's just a parasite, I guess technically a symbiont because it doesn't really have an effect on most insects. And the way they use this bacteria is that if one mosquito has, or say some male mosquito has this bacteria of strain A and a female has this bacteria of strain B, and they mate, that female mosquito will create eggs, but they won't be viable. They'll fail. Okay. Whereas if they both have A, things happen normally. And so the idea behind this intervention is all the mosquitoes in the wild have type A. You rear a bunch of type B mosquitoes in a lab, and you release a bunch of these male type B mosquitoes. And every time they mate with a female, the eggs don't show up. And so in partnership with Alphabet. Alphabet is like Google. They have like a life sciences division. They've been doing this. And it's shown like it's been extremely effective in some areas, reducing mosquito populations by like 95% within a year. And so the idea was to model this to get a better sense of what's going on in the system. I think I have more pictures. Yeah, you can just click through this. They raise the mosquitoes in California, ship them to Hawaii, do some inspections, and then they release the mosquitoes from a helicopter. I think I might have a video on the next slide. Yeah, maybe we can watch that. You don't need sound.
Oh, okay.
It's like an Instagram video. So I say this was happening until a few weeks ago. It's because this was primarily funded through a Forest Service and National Park Service grant, and yeah, everything. Yeah. So I mean, it was very promising. They were starting to use drones. The helicopters are very expensive, pretty dangerous, and can't get very close to where the mosquitoes are, right? So they were dropping these kind of pods that you saw there with the male mosquitoes from very high up, not able to track where they were actually landing. With drones, you can get right near the forest, right, and drop them, and with very good accuracy. It's very cool.
Yeah.
I didn't get to ride on a helicopter. Yeah.
Is that, do
Yeah.
you want the entire thing or?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so the idea behind this project, we have an existing model of how that Wolbachia and the mosquito population interact. We have a model of how the bird community, so there's different bird species, they interact with each other. And then we have models for each of those species, how they're affected by avian malaria and how they get infected by mosquitoes. And then we want to link these three models together to get a sense of what's going on there. And so this was joint work with Krista Seidel, who's actually like the mosquito control supervisor there in Maui. That's where this is happening. And then some folks at Virginia Tech who helped come up with the model. you put through this. Actually, I don't want to talk about that. This is more detail, but
Okay.
elevation is a big thing, understanding how elevation plays a role. And so, again, this project is like, the hope was to have some data to work with. So they had data, it was very, hard to collect, and it was of different types. And so with these sorts of models, you can use multiple data sources and plug it into the model to try and understand what's going on. Now that the intervention is ending, we'll still be able to collect some data. Theoretically, if there were still people on the ground, we could get a sense of how effective it was because we could measure how things are getting worse once the intervention goes away. But because the people that let go are the field staff that are the ones going up into the mountains, and they're carrying like car batteries up there because that's how they power the mosquito traps. It's very interesting. Collecting the data is going to be very difficult. But the hope is to, again, take this dynamical system model and this data and put it together in kind of 3 different projects. And I probably have some grant places I was going to ask for money from. Yeah, like USGS is very involved in this. Yeah, so thank you all for listening, letting me ramble about different things.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat,
Okay.
so I'm gonna. Carlo, do you wanna just ask it?
Oh, I do have a question for myself, but I was first gonna uplift the question in the chat that got asked first, so I just wanted to let them get their answer first.
The person in the chat, do you wanna ask your question first?
Sure, sure. I'm more than welcome to do that. Good afternoon. I'm actually joining you guys from Ghana, West Africa. Your work is very interesting. I just wanted to find out how you decided to get into your field of research. Was this something you figured out as you went over the years, or you always knew that you wanted to get into ecological research and that? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess like the specific ecology side, why that is the area I focus on. I've always been interested in like natural systems and how things are so interactive. I remember learning in like 3rd grade or something. In Hawaii, we have invasive pigs, boars, and we learned about how they have all these different impacts on the environment that you wouldn't even think of. So like one of them is that because they dig up roots of plants, they cause a lot of erosion. And so they're up in these mountains causing erosion. And then when it rains, this erosion washes into the ocean and causes coral to die off. So like I distinctly remember learning that and being amazed at how like, I mean, it's a negative example of how we're so interconnected. But I always thought that was cool how science can like, help us to understand these things. And so the particular type of mathematics I do is well suited to modeling these interacting systems. Yeah, so that's one answer.
Thank you. Did you have any more questions, or Carlo?
Yeah, sure, I can ask. So I joined a little bit late, but when I joined, I think I heard that your research primarily was on the theoretical and zoonotic side, thinking about vector-borne illnesses. But I did see a slide somewhere later in your presentation that talked about, I think, human behaviors or health behavior changes. I'm wondering if through your research experience you have any like or I guess like through your research, if you have any experiences working with health behavior modeling, thinking about like also like innovations and inventions such as like those like smoke things that help repel mosquitoes, or using bug spray and at what time, how long if like different components wear off. I think like a lot of times, so I work in like public mental health, global mental health, and I think that sometimes we get lost in the idea that human behavior is much more complex and there's a lot of free will and choice that's an agency that's in there that might not necessarily be captured within like modeling and regressions and the recipes that you were talking about earlier. I'm wondering if you do have any experience with health behavior modeling, is it is it really different or really similar to kind of modeling the work that you mentioned that in your talk?
Well, I'll say not any direct experience, but in writing that paper, I did a lot of research to try and figure out if anyone else has done this, anyone else has focused on human behaviors towards mosquito biting, right? So, I mean, we all have personal experience. We know we behave differently if there's lots of mosquitoes around us. But from my literature search, I couldn't find anything, much less modeling, but just a paper studying these behaviors, right? So I found one survey in Italy that was like a phone survey asking people how they, respond to different levels of mosquito biting. Very, very kind of basic, useful information, but not too detailed. Then another survey they did with people in their own backyards where they asked them like how many times do they think they got bit. They like interviewed for 1 hour with a previous, I think, half an hour where they're sitting in their yard and they asked them like, how many times did you get bitten in the past 30 minutes? How likely are you to change your behavior in the future because of this? And like measured a bunch of different things. But and then in regards to repellents, so of course, like the people who produce bug sprays do a lot of research on how it impacts you individually. So we have a really good understanding of how using, DEET spray properly affects your chances of getting bitten by a mosquito. But we don't understand, these models can be used to understand how that translates at a population level. I haven't really plugged that in, directly. But that's one way the modeling is useful, is that you can go from individual level effects to population level ones. And then in regards to you mentioned the like smoke repellents. I recently saw a paper about that, but interestingly, like, like in South Asia and Southeast Asia, like those smoke-based repellents are super common. I grew up with them too in Hawaii. I would have thought there's like a lot of science showing whether or not they're effective, and only recently have I seen a couple papers that study their effectiveness. And so they're not super effective, but in certain settings, they're really useful. The gold standard is DEET spray and wearing long sleeves. And yeah, that's what makes human behavior really important, and just like sociology even, right? So like you'll find that men are much more at risk of mosquito-borne diseases in places where they're prevalent because they're more often working in outdoors professions, right? And even though they could be all covered up outdoors, it's so hot, no one's going to choose to do that, even if it means they won't get malaria, right? And so understanding the psychology of how do you like make someone do, I mean, we're all familiar with this with masks and COVID, right? Like how do you get someone to change their behavior to protect themselves and the people around them is extremely challenging. But
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? So, I'm circling back to my question before, like you seem to know a lot about just like now it's like psychology and human behavior. Like, do you learn that through osmosis or just because of the collaborators you chose to
Yeah.
work with?
I mean, reading a lot of papers
Okay,
and
yeah.
learning how to like summarize what it says in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these things stick in my head because I have to like understand them not being in these areas. Like if you ask me more specific math questions, I'd probably struggle more at answering them because
Mm.
that's not the stuff I need to kind of be able to pull more quickly. I have when I do math, I get to sit down and just focus in on that one thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't have conversations with people about it really.
Mhm.
Yeah, so applied math, you have to be kind of a jack of all trades.
Okay,
Mhm.
interesting. Carla?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, my name's Carla. I'm a faculty member in Fish and Wildlife, and I really enjoyed your presentation. And as somebody whose degree is in ecology, I was quite fascinated by your comment that you preferred the math culture as opposed to ecology, because knowing also people in literature, I found ecologists much more friendly to work with than literature people. And I always thought it was sort of because the knowledge, right? As a field ecologist, like it could take me literally 7 years to get the data that I need to answer a question. And so if I talk to you about my ideas and you can do it faster than me, more power to you, right? Whereas like in literature, and I would assume the same as in math, if I give you my idea, like you could go home and publish it out from under me in a matter of weeks. And so I always thought that's what led to what seemed to me a nastier sort of social environment. But I'm curious what your perception was of the ecology department and what you talked about as, these cultural differences between math and ecology.
Yeah, my experience in math is if you share an idea with someone, it's implicitly assumed they're gonna collaborate with you on approaching that. Yeah, because if there's a saying in that all math is either impossible or trivial, and it's because if there's a solution to the problem you're working on, then you just write it down on a piece of paper and someone else reads it and it's correct, right? Whereas if you don't have a solution, then it's impossible. And so if you have a question and you bring it up to someone like, I'm working on this thing, what do you think about it? That's kind of implicitly assumed. There are like huge millennium problems, but I mean, the idea that someone will be able to figure that out just from you mentioning it before you get it through is, I don't think, especially these days, this era, it takes much longer to get new results. There are like math questions that they'll hold like whole conferences on just this particular question. In ecology, I mean, one part of the culture, and this is just all of science, I think, is that the pace is much faster, I found. So at least in the theoretical ecology. And so whereas like that paper I showed you is very like detailed and took a long time to write to make sure that all the math was correct. And I'm not saying, I don't leave any stone unturned. That was much slower or than I would have been if I published it just as like a theoretical ecology paper. And it didn't sit right with me to like leave things unproven. Yeah. But I mean, I don't have an issue. Like you said, I found it collaborative. It's cool to work directly, like have field ecologists right next to you, and they give you a sense of like why the data is not that easy to collect, right? It's like, why don't we know this or that thing? It's like, well, we have to go into a mountain stream and stay there for a week or whatever. Yeah. So it's that also, helped me stay humble.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. We have time for maybe one more question. Yes.
I know you mentioned earlier about like Mosquito Project and people are mixing like the mathematical models, data science, machine learning. How do those two fields interplay with each other?
A lot. I'll give maybe a few examples. So one thing is like, I talked a lot about like building these models and like figuring out how to put these boxes and arrows together and the rates going between them and probabilities. So you can use machine learning to come to figure that out itself. And so, for instance, what you can do is just give it some trajectories over time of how populations are changing. You give that to these particular, I think they're called neural ODE systems, and it'll just spit out a system of equations that predicts those trajectories that you're given, right? And so that might be useful if your goal is just to do prediction, right? I want to know, I have all this data from the previous year. I want to know what's going to happen in the next month. And it could spit that out for you. And so that's one thing you can do. The problem with that being it's not explainable, right? I can't look at that model and say, if I were to adjust one of these parameters, what's going to happen necessarily? Or yeah, because it's just kind of fitting the data as best as it could. You could do that with statistics previously. One benefit of these new machine learning systems is you can kind of correct it. You can say, well, you're just spitting out the best match to these curves, but I'm going to enforce this rule that it has to have this or that property. And so it's getting a lot more explainable because of that. In terms of other machine learning things, so I mentioned that a lot of data is just not available. And so, for instance, one project I was looking at a bunch of different species of primates and a bunch of different, or every single species of primate, every single species of rodent. And I needed these particular parameter values for those species to try and understand which ones would be more or less likely to be a reservoir for disease. And there's lots of gaps in that data set. And so you could either, if you skipped every single species where you don't have full data on, you'll just end up with like 5 out of the list of 100 to 300. But you can use machine learning to try and impute the missing data points. And then you have, the best guesses for what those values would be. And so that's what we ended up doing and plugging it in to complete that project. So there's many different ways that machine learning, data science interact with modeling.
Just to kind of follow up, have you been able to like see if it was accurate? Like double check it, like if it does a prediction for the next month?
Yeah,
Have you been
yeah.
able to like take the readings and
Mhm.
compare it?
So, I mean, validation is like the hardest thing because for some reason, it's easy to get funding to predict something. And it's hard to get funding to validate it, which is like, we care about the validation more. So not a project I've been on, but a related one. So using machine learning to predict reservoirs of these were bats carrying viruses. So the goal was to predict, we want to know the top 10 bats that are risks for carrying viruses. The machine learning program gave the top 10, I think maybe 6 of those we already knew about. The other 4 we had no evidence, and so they went out in the field and then tested these bats, and they found they actually do carry these viruses that we should be concerned about, right? Coronaviruses. And so that's one example I have, not on a project I've been on, but familiar with.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Allen. This was amazing. I think you're our last learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah,
thank
thanks for the
you.
opportunity. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm gonna stop recording now.